to the final, unfortunately, live Locked On Wolves postcast. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm here with Chelanga from Zone Coverage and the the C&D NBA show. Man, mine's going everywhere right now. So the season just ended. Here we are doing the live postcast. And Chelanga, you just did some of the press conferences there at Target Center. We'll start with some general thoughts from the game. Obviously, really disappointing. A lot of similarities between this loss and really all of them except for game 2 in this series. 3 of the 4 Timberwolves losses had really similar game flows, really. What initial thoughts do you have off the top?
Yeah, I think if we start at the beginning of the game, I was really it was the positive sign from the beginning is that early on it seemed like the Wolves were super intentional about attacking Ja Morant. They switched Ja onto Anthony Edwards multiple times in the first quarter and got him going right away, which was like a strategic difference that I saw. And I don't know if it was a mindset thing from Ant of like watching the tape and seeing like, oh, you know what, I wasn't taking advantage of this mismatch, or if it was the Wolves, and Chris Finch saying like, we are going to do this and we're going to attack this from the beginning. Either way, it really worked. And he had 21 first half points. It looked like he was on pace for like a really amazing night. Ended up a little bit disappointing in the end.
Yeah, we have to start with the Ant. First half. What did he? I think he had 20 at halftime, but he had like 16 or something in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
and
right.
Like you said, they were hunting that matchup. They were, when they were having small screen to try and get the switches to get John Ant, and that was really key. Clearly part of the game plan early, and the Grizzlies. One of the adjustments they made, or I guess this isn't an adjustment because it's exactly what they did in the last game, but they decided to wait until the end of the game to go small and use Dillon Brooks to primarily guard Karl-Anthony Towns. And Towns had a couple nice stretches in this game. The Wolves actually got him his shots. He was just pretty inefficient. It was really all about Ant in terms of the Timberwolves offense. And first half, he was obviously phenomenal. He slowed down a little in the second half. The Wolves offense in general was very reliant on transition minutes in the second half. One thing I thought was interesting is Jared Vanderbilt was very quiet in the first half after he got back into the game. Part of that's because Jaden McDaniels was playing really well. The Wolves were also playing Jordan McLaughlin a lot because he was playing well. We'll talk more about him in a little bit. But Jared Vanderbilt didn't get back in the game until the start of the second half, and then he injected them with this energy. The Wolves were up by just a couple at halftime, I think maybe 3 points. And Vanderbilt had a great stint at the beginning of the third quarter, and then he left, and we didn't see him again. Any thoughts on that? I thought that was a little bit strange because even though he had a couple quiet games and a couple really good ones, it felt like his presence and that energy and the defense could have been useful in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit tough down the stretch, especially when McDaniels is rolling, because one of the biggest issues, I think down the stretch, there are two big issues: the Wolves' offensive execution and their defensive rebounding. Those have been sort of the Achilles heels constantly in these fourth quarter comebacks for the Grizz. And so it's tough with the lineup combinations, wanting to keep obviously one of either D'Lo or Pat Bev in the game, wanting to keep McDaniels in the game because he's hot, and J-Mac because he was hot too. It sort of feels like maybe just wasn't room for Jared Vanderbilt in the rotation. But, I would have liked to see the Wolves go a little bit big. Well, the Grizzlies were small because it's not like they would be giving up anything defensively on the perimeter with Vanderbilt and McDaniels at the 3 and the 4. And he would have helped a lot down the stretch when the Grizzlies seemed to get offensive rebounds at will.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say is the rebounding thing. Obviously that was a theme coming into the series. It was a theme throughout the series. The Timberwolves were out rebounded in every game, including the 2 that they won, and drastically so in game 1, which was a pretty easy win. I think were a -13 on the glass, but the Grizzlies came into the series, as everyone knows, the best offensive rebounding team in the league. The Wolves were 27th in defensive rebound rate in the regular season. And in this game, they gave up 17 offensive rebounds, and it felt like, I don't know, 16 of them were in the final 5 minutes of the game. Obviously, that's not true, but there were a couple of those possessions. It was just rebound after rebound, and it just combination of Brandon Clark being really good and Jaren Jackson Jr. not being in as much foul trouble in this game and actually being able to play 30-plus minutes. But that was a really tough deal for the Wolves at the end of the game was just the complete and utter inability to grab rebounds. Again, 17 offensive rebounds for Memphis. Overall for the game, the Wolves are a minus 19 on the glass, which is not a recipe to win a playoff game. Also of note, the Timberwolves had a huge free throw advantage in the first half. I don't know exactly what it was, but I think the Grizzlies had attempted like 6 or 7 free throws by halftime. They finished the game. The Wolves actually only attempted 2 more free throws than Memphis all game long. And for the first time this series, I'm almost positive the Wolves were actually outshot in terms of percentage at the free throw line. They missed. I mean, the Wolves weren't awful. They were a shade under 70%, but that's obviously it's not good. It's not where they typically are. They had some uncharacteristic misses at the free throw line as well. And I think that kind of low key hurt the Wolves throughout the game.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And, in the second half, Ja Morant, the Grizzlies offense was pretty stalled. The Wolves started the second half on like a 17-7 run. And then Ja Morant just got really aggressive, started going to the basket, got a few free throws, and all of a sudden the Grizzlies offense was clicking again. It's pretty great for Memphis to have that weapon in their back pocket. Like, oh, our offense stinks. Like, Ja, go get to the free throw line, because he is just really, really skilled at attacking the basket in that way.
Yeah. So a couple guys we got to talk about. Let's start with D'Angelo Russell. And what went down in this game for D'Lo. I guess obviously he of course started had a slow start to the game, had one made field goal in the first half, had a quick 5 points right out of halftime, and then had a really brutal stretch in the fourth quarter, ended up on the bench for the final, I think 5 or 6 minutes, about when he got subbed out, 4 or 5 minutes to play. And Jordan McLaughlin paired with Patrick Beverley in the backcourt to close the game. I'll let you go first. What are your thoughts on D'Lo in this game? And I guess small picture, this game specifically, and then we can talk really quickly, bigger picture, what does this mean going into the offseason, if anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought he had like a great start to the game defensively.
Yeah.
He was super active, had 3 steals like right away. Really, got the Wolves moving in transition. I think down the end, I mean, we saw that in this series that D'Lo just didn't have it going offensively, and down the stretch, he was going to be taking shots and sort of stalling the off. I mean, that's kind of like what we've seen. Whereas J-Mac and Chris Finch mentioned it in the presser, he said, J-Mac was on the court and he was giving the Wolves pop, and he was penetrating and getting to the paint and making the defense react. It's something that D'Lo just really wasn't having success doing tonight. In my brain, I was like, I think that Finch is going to bring in J-Mac for Patrick Beverley, because just the emotional side of sitting D'Angelo Russell in a winner-go-home game. And so the fact that Finch made that choice, I think that was like a very bold coaching choice. I think it says a lot about, how Chris Finch feels about D'Angelo Russell as a player, and like, long term. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and there's a lot of room in the offseason. There will be a ton of discussion with the way that things, like, already one of the biggest questions hanging over the Timberwolves moving forward is D'Lo's got 1 year left on a max deal. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to get the super max. Like, what do you do with D'Lo?
Yeah.
Is somebody going to be interested in giving him the max? What is his actual value? What does he mean to the Wolves? How much do we rate the Towns D'Lo, friendship, which was one of the key story, headlines when Gerson Rosas initially brought D'Lo to town, which feels like a really long time ago, but just over 2 years ago. What does that mean moving forward? And now with the way that this playoff series went, because you go back to the play-in, and D'Lo, I think he basically had 2 good games over the course of the 6 in this series in the play-in game, and a couple of kind of neutral games, and he had 3 or 4 really poor games overall. And to your point, he played well defensively early in the game, but the stretch, a couple bad turnovers. I think there was one after a nice defensive stand in the fourth quarter, 5-6 minutes to play. He had a bad turnover that led to a 3 the other way for the Grizzlies.
Threw the ball away. He just threw it right to Memphis.
Yeah. And there were a couple of those. There was one. Yeah. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. It was like and I just, there's tons of time to talk about this in the offseason, but it's a really interesting thing. And I think your point about Chris Finch is an interesting one, because obviously the Timberwolves traded for D'Angelo Russell a year before Chris Finch became the head coach. And, if Chris Finch was handpicking his point guards to run what he wants to run, I don't know that D'Lo is the guy.
Right.
Now, obviously D'Lo's got he's a good player, and we could have the conversation. This is arguably D'Lo's best regular season of his career. You could say he was just as good as he was in his all-star season with the Nets, and he was certainly better defensively in a very different role than what he did in Brooklyn. But this game was this series was really rough, and it's so crazy considering the 4 regular season games between the two teams and how well he played against Memphis. And Memphis obviously made it a key point for them to slow him down
Yes.
in this series, and they did more than slow him down. They really shut him down.
Well, a lot of big, strong, long defenders on Memphis, and that's kind of D'Lo's kryptonite. But I will say it is new ownership, new general management, new coaching for D'Lo this season, and so his place on the team is definitely like the biggest question mark moving forward.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Jaden McDaniels.
Yes,
Jaden
please.
McDaniels was fantastic. 24 points, 8 of 9 shooting, 5 of 6 on 3-point attempts, including a big one that pulled the Wolves to within 1 in the final minute and a half. 3 of 4 at the line, 4 rebounds in 33 minutes, and 1 block. Really, really good game for Jaden McDaniels.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that stuck out to me most was his defensive discipline. He would close out and he would stay on his feet. He wasn't falling for pump fakes, which has been so frustrating this whole season, is that he would get in early foul trouble over, silly, undisciplined defense, but he was super disciplined defensively. So he was able to stay on the court, knock down a couple threes early, and that really got him going. If we want to look back on anything about this game, we can look back and we can say, look, the 2 leading scorers for the Wolves are 20 and 21 years old. This is a young team. The window is wide open. They gave the second best team in the league, a run for their money in the first round, and that feels like a big W to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you take a step back and you look at, like you said, 20, 21 years old. Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards each are just in their second year on the rookie deals, so there's still years left before they're going to get the big contracts, and the Timberwolves have all their picks moving forward. And so there's all these reasons to be super optimistic about this. And the other thing I think is important to remember is the Timberwolves were the 7th seed. Memphis was, by winning percentage, the second best team, I believe, in the NBA this season.
Yes, they were.
And like the Wolves, people like just nationally, like the 10,000 foot view is people are like, oh, the Wolves could win this series obviously after game 1, but even after the game 3 collapse and winning game 4, everyone's like, wait a minute. The way that they bounce back is really uncommon from that game 3 collapse. The fact that the Wolves had a double-digit lead in 3 of the 4 games they lost, which obviously tells us 2 things: that they played really well and could have beaten the Grizzlies, and also that they have a lot to learn as a team. There's a lot to pull from this series, and it's not just a silver lining, hey, let's pat ourselves on the back and say this was a good season. There's legitimately a lot to be really happy about moving forward. And this game, to me, the only real question mark, besides the fortitude of this team to be able to withstand these runs in game and not give up these big leads, whatever it's going to take in the fourth quarter to understand, like, hey, we can't collapse, or what do we have to do differently? The biggest thing is the D'Lo thing. I mean, otherwise, the Timberwolves have a really, strong young rotation. The contract stuff, is a conversation for another time, but like there is some room to make some moves this offseason. Patrick Beverley's back again next year. The core of the team's in place. Jared Vanderbilt's on a team-friendly contract. There's a lot to come out of this series feeling pretty good about.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say is just Finch in his press conference, he said that this season was setting a foundation for the Wolves moving forward, and I think it's a very strong foundation. And he talked about how the Grizzlies are a team and they don't beat themselves down the stretch. They execute, they perform really well, and he said that's just not in the Wolves' DNA yet. But that's something that they can work on. They can go back, with the whole offseason of planning and work and film review, and iron out those little tiny details that become super big in those really tight, in the biggest moments, the smallest things are huge. And so, the Wolves are, they got a team for the future. And this series gives me even more hope and faith that, next season, the season after, they can be real competitors.
Yeah, and there's certainly parallels and quite a bit of symmetry between the Wolves this year and Memphis last year. I mean, Memphis won game 1. They actually lost in 5 games last year in the first round of the playoffs. The Wolves pushed this to 6 and, went toe-to-toe with a really good young team in Memphis. And actually, the other thing real quickly is they did such a great job on Ja Morant. We've talked about that, in a lot of these postcasts. But, I mean, other than like fourth quarter game 5, which obviously was really significant, and he was pretty good down the stretch distributing the ball in this game, but they made things really difficult for Ja Morant. And point of attack defense was such a big issue for the Timberwolves team prior to this year, and even at times early this season, but much improved. And the fact that there's been that much improvement defensively for this team this year is really, really fantastic. All right. This is the final live postcast of the season. I hope we bring these back in the fall. Any final thoughts, Chelanga?
I think we covered everything really well, Ben. It's been a pleasure. I mean, this has been just such a fun Wolves season. I have no complaints. After the game, a bunch of the crowd stayed and gave an ovation to Towns and to Finch, and Finch made sure to clap at the crowd as he left, and Towns looked a little misty as he was leaving, waving the crowd goodbye. I mean, just a beautiful season for the Timberwolves, and I think culturally, it's sort of a stepping stone to something great.
Absolutely. Be sure to subscribe and check out the Locked On Wolves podcast and also the C&D NBA show, where Chelanga is one of the hosts, and also he writes over at Zone Coverage. And Chelanga, come on Locked On Wolves here this offseason a few times. I think that would be fun.
Hey, I would love to, and you're always welcome on the C&D NBA show too. So
I appreciate that.
all right.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this season.
Peace.